Hi, my name is K.Thomas, W1DED. Over the past several months, I've had the privilege to interview and learn from several highly skilled amateur radio contesters. After one of those interviews with Scott K0MD, the former editor of National Contest Journal, an idea percolated that maybe I could get a group of guys together and talk about contesting on a regular basis. Randy, K5ZD, and Scott, K0MD, Chris, KL9A, and Dan, Craig, N6MJ, all agreed to participate in this. I have two of those guys with me tonight. The other two are off doing other things, but Chris is with me tonight, and so is Dan. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks for having us.
Before we jump into this, what's the update from a contesting standpoint at both of your shacks? Have you been contesting the last couple of weeks?
I'll start off. So we both actually just participated in the CW Sprint over this past weekend. That's one of the few contests that I actually do from my home QTH here. It's only 20, 40, and 80 meters, and I'm pretty competitive on those bands from here. So it's one of those contests that not everyone's a big fan of, but I've been doing it for a really long time. It's one of my favorite contests of the year, and they really enjoy doing that one.
Yeah, the Sprint, people love it. It has a kind of a cult following. There was a lot of new people on this time, a whole bunch of mults, which was super cool. Not that I worked them all, but it was great to see all the activity, a lot of new guys jumping in, and I would encourage people not to be afraid of the Sprint. Plenty of people were going slower, and just kind of getting on, and most of the reports are usually positive, so it's a great contest.
And Dan, how does qualifying look for the WRTC? I should tell you, in case you didn't hear the last conversation that we had with these guys, that you weren't able to join. Chris made it clear that your job is to get qualified for the WRTC 2026. So no pressure, but how's that looking?
Well, Chris is no dummy. He knows that I'm capable of doing it. I've done it several times in the past. So we've only had the two qualifying contests so far, which were the CQ Worldwides from last year. Everything's going according to plan. Got my 1,000 points for Worldwide CW.
Lame.
Yeah. And actually, we have our next qualifying contest coming up very shortly. The next weekend after this one is ARRL CW, and that's the next qualifying one. I'm going to be on from ND7K as a single op. Going to be going all out, trying to make sure that we get all the points we can. And so far, so good.
So I put a notice out to our listeners that if they had questions, they should send them my way. And I got a couple emails that I wanted to address today. One is from Lucy M6ECG. And Lucy writes, great video on contesting. I have questions. I work phone almost exclusively on 10 watts and usually use stroke P as my suffix. Out of the two, stroke QRP or stroke portable, which would be more likely to be heard? Before I continue the email, what's your take on that question?
Well, I'll go with that one. Speaking for myself, I think saying /QRP is a big major headache. Although sometimes that's all you hear is a QRP, but if you have to use / something, I say /P. That's my opinion.
I was going to add in that I agree with Chris. I think the /portable is sufficient. No need for the QRP in most situations.
She continues, also, as I am a YL and have a higher pitch voice than most ops, would being slightly off frequency get me better heard or just irritate?
So I think in this situation, the key for sideband contesting and just general operating is not so much being off frequency a little bit. I think it's more of a key to be good with your timing. And what I mean is if somebody's running a big pileup and everybody calls the first second that the guy is done transmitting, maybe wait a second or two and then call after everybody else is done calling. And that's a great way for a weaker station to be able to separate themselves from the pack. And I think definitely being a YL does help. Something that you can definitely tune into a little bit better in a pile-up situation too.
Chris, anything to add?
That's pretty much it. No need to be off frequency though. I think that comment was made for CW versus phone. So if you're a phone op, just throw the off frequency thing out the window and work on your timing. That's everything.
Yeah, and I think her question comes subsequent to the conversation we had with Randy, K5ZD, who was talking about CW. So thanks for that clarification. Her final question was, I noticed stations just giving partial calls get picked up quicker. Technically, this is not UK operating procedure. Do contest stations prefer a partial because of its brevity?
I'll go with this one. So partial calls are terrible. You want to get the full call right the first time. If you think about brevity, if you come back with, 2 letters, and then I come back with your 2 letters, and then we come back again, and then again, and then again, that's slower than just getting the full call the right time, right the first time. So I wouldn't use a partial ever. If you say your full call and the pileup, the guy running the pileup only gets a couple letters, that's different. But never start out with just partials. That's counterproductive for sure.
In the contest environment, that's 100% correct. And I think even just in general operating, that's just good procedure is to always give your full call. You're definitely gonna hear some of the other operators just giving their last 2, but unless for some reason if the station running the pileup asks for the last 2, that'll be the only time. Otherwise, send your full call. The whole idea is to increase rate in most situations, and the only way you can do that is by getting the full call.
Thanks, guys. And thank you, Lucy M6ECG, for that email. The next email is from Gawain Williams, N0GJW. He says, a young contester primarily based in the Midwest, Iowa. I enjoy watching and learning from your videos. I have a few questions. I would love if you could ask your contest panel on the next show. The first question is, what contesting advice would you give to your young contest self?
So I'll start with that. So I wouldn't give myself any additional advice over what I actually did. And what I think really worked for me is being active, just getting on, working guys outside of contests, rag chewing on both CW and sideband. And that's something that I did a lot when I was first starting out. At this point in my career, I don't have time to do it anymore, but I'm very thankful that I went that route. And it really helped, fine tune all the skills that you need for contesting. And I think that I went about it the correct way. I really can't think of anything else I would have done differently. I'm very happy with how things turned out. So I think just be active, try different contests, different kind of contests. If you're not into CW yet, try poking around on CW a little bit. And I think that should be good.
Yeah, my bulleted list here is basically what Dan just said. Dan and I were both kind of do it on the same path, I think, for years, both on a lot from home, operating, rag chewing, working DX. And the good thing about that is you learn the bands, you learn when it's open, you learn openings that maybe aren't super common that other guys miss. You get more familiar with things. Operating a lot can't be understated. Maybe don't operate so much to where it's a detriment to your school or your work or something. We can probably relate to that a little bit. But we both operated a lot with multi-ops, and I stressed that on a couple of these already. Multi-ops are the best way to learn from other guys, see new techniques. You learn more in person than anything else. And just remember that it's supposed to be fun. If you're operating a contest and it's not fun, well, do something else and then come back to it.
So I have a question to add to Gawain's. Do you think there's value in operating parks on the air as an activator? As somebody, as you know, who just got back into the hobby a couple of years ago, parks on the air became an easy way for me to get on the air because I didn't have to worry about a big station here at the house. And, I started off thinking, I just need 10 QSOs to activate the park. But quite often I was finding myself dealing with a pileup right away and doing, as relatively new ham back in the hobby, doing easily 100 QSOs an hour. This seems as though that experience would be helpful to somebody who wanted to get into contesting down the road.
Yeah, I think POTA and SOTA and all that stuff is actually really, really good, like you said. I have a little bit similar experience back when I was starting out. There wasn't any POTA back then, but there was county hunting, which still exists now. But I was a big county hunter back when I was a teenager. And so me and my brother and my dad, we would get out in our cars and drive across the country. We would spend weeks at a time driving around into these different counties, And every time you got to a new county, it's like you're activating a new POTA, right? And you get a big pile up. You might work 60, 70 guys in that one county. And it was done both on uh, sideband and on CW. And I think that also really helped me um, gain a lot of the pileup skills that I have now because uh, I'm sure it's the same in the POTA community. I'm not a member of it myself, but I'm sure it's a lot of the same guys that you're working each time you go to a new park. And that was the same thing with the counties. I knew who was going to be calling, and you start to learn call sign recognition. And I think that's a big skill that you can definitely translate well into contesting too, is to be able to pick out parts of call signs and actually know who it is without getting the whole call. And Kevin, I bet you, if I ask you if you're able to do that when you're doing your parks, you probably can. I would imagine at this point.
No, that's absolutely true. And I just got back from the Bahamas where I was operating C6A, and that exact thing happened. Now that I've been on the air for a couple of years, I was hearing call signs that I knew, and I really wasn't hearing them that well, but I could fill in the blanks, and it made the pileup just go through that much faster.
The county hunting thing is a great parallel. For me, I grew up in Alaska, so Alaska always gets a pileup. So that was kind of how I got used to that stuff. But one thing the parks and the summits does is it gets you on the technical side also. And a point I meant to make was, a new ham, put all your money into your antennas, get a radio that works, and then do the antennas and work in portable, even field days. But the POTA stuff for sure, you're always trying something new. We all want to be louder. So you're trying new stuff all the time, and that's a huge part of contesting also. So I think it's great.
It's another great point that I wouldn't have thought of. Just in the past year and a half, I've probably used 4 different antennas portably, and one of those many different configurations, it was a buddy pull, and you are forced to do a lot of problem solving. Whereas if you just have a fixed station, maybe a little bit less of that. And certainly that has translated into some help with contests, because once you're into a contest and you're on hour number 30, and I had the situation where a rotor broke, I needed to figure out how I'm going to move forward and not quit entirely. So that is a really good point, Chris. Thank you. His next question, this is Goyane again. How does one prepare and recuperate from a 48-hour solo op contest?
First of all, one thing that I definitely do not recommend is actually doing all 48 hours. Me and Chris have done it many times, and I'm probably gonna do it again as contests coming up, but I just can't help myself. But it's really bad for you. But if you want to actually participate in a 48-hour contest, you want to try and figure out, when the best time to take a little bit of off time for, you want to make sure you get a little bit of rest. I think that, leading up into a big contest like that, there's a lot of things that you can do to kind of prep yourself, both mentally and prep your body. I think that it's really important to be healthy, and, have some sort of workout regimen that you do, because that's going to lead to success. I mean, I always tell people that when I'm in the gym, I'm working out so I can sit in a chair for 48 hours straight. Uh, and that's kind of true. And, if I don't do that, it really makes it difficult to actually complete that. And then as far as recuperating from a contest like that, hopefully you've gotten a little bit of rest when the time is appropriate. And then I always make sure that I block off some time for the following Monday, just to kind of make sure that I get back to my senses. I don't want to go straight back into work or school or whatever if I can avoid it. But I think it's important to make sure you give yourself a little bit of rest after the contest so that you can kind of, get back to your normal routine before you start going back to like your job and stuff like that.
So Dan, when you say you wouldn't recommend doing a 48-hour sprint through a contest, how many hours would you recommend?
I think it depends on what your goal is. I think for most contesters, maybe the goal might be to beat their friend, or something like that. I think that's one of the things that I really try to push for newer operators is don't expect to win, and it's okay if you don't win. You don't have to. You got to figure out what your goal is. So I think a normal person outside of me and Chris, maybe like somewhere like 30 hours sounds like a lot to me, but 30 hours in a contest, you can work a lot of guys and put in a big score. If you are really serious, maybe you go up to 40 hours, and that still gives you enough time to get some rest both nights, that kind of a thing. But it just really depends on what you want to take out of the contest.
Well, I appreciate that because I think if you do overdo it, and I've experienced this, you sort of lose any desire to get back on the radio for weeks and maybe months afterwards. But when I have paced myself, then I feel better on Monday, and I find myself back on the radio the next weekend. So I think that's great perspective.
Yeah, Dan hit it on the head. It all depends on your goal. And I think Randy said it a long time ago. You really have to want to do 48 hours and able to do it. It's a mental game. The first 24 hours is pretty easy if you get good rate. If you're doing 48 from the West Coast, I mean, I've done it from the West Coast. It was awful. I got my butt kicked, but I did it. It depends on your goal. If your goal is to beat your friend, unfortunately, competing against my friend Dan, you have to operate for 54 hours. Um, but our goals were different. We were trying to set records and do things. But if you can get on, and if you want to work a bunch of countries, get on at the peak times. Just pick your propagation and have fun that way. But if you don't prep ahead of time, I quit caffeine and alcohol for 2 weeks before CQ Worldwides, which is harder than it seems, especially the caffeine. You got to eat right, you got to exercise. It's all one big package for sure.
Well, I love this theme that's come up before that you need to know what your target is. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to win the contest. And I think if you pay attention as a newcomer to the contest forums, everybody's talking about winning. But I like the marathon analogy, or in my case, a half marathon. I really have no intention of winning. I'm out there to have sort of fun and to finish. I guess it'd be like golfing also. You're not necessarily going to be Tiger Woods, but you want to go out there and enjoy yourself and know what your goal is. So I think it's fantastic advice. The next question is, what efforts have they made to bring new young contesters into the competitive scene?
That's something that's really important to me. We do try our best. So I'm very involved with the ND7K station in Arizona, as well as ZF1A down in the Cayman Islands. And we do like to try and promote youth anytime that we can. There are a few guys down here in Southern California that are part of the younger generation, and they showed a lot of promise, and we're able to get them into both stations, actually, over 97K and ZF1A. And I think that we've mentioned it before in our conversations, that it's important for station owners to kind of keep an open mind and possibly open some doors. And then I think the other really big thing that's kind of taken off in the last couple of years is the whole remote game, because remote ham radio in particular does have stations that are set up specifically for youth operations. And I think that remote ham radio has done a lot more than anything else out there, even station hosts that try and bring in youth operators, because every kid has internet, right? But not every kid can travel. So I think that they've done a really great job of bringing in the younger operators and giving them an opportunity to actually use big antennas and put up some decent scores.
Yeah, the remote stuff is great for youth. It'd have been super cool when I was around. I was lucky enough to have my home station, but when I was young. But I live in Montana. Not a whole lot of activity going on here with young people in ham radio. I mentioned WPX phones, our next contest, and one of the ND7K ops, young guy named Levi K6JO is going. So he asked if we were doing anything, and I was like, no, I guess we are now. Stuff like that, as a kid, I really appreciated it. And station owners, they kind of lead the charge. So that's definitely something I try to get back onto.
The next question is, when operating in the big ones, such as CQ, WW, ARRLDX, how do Midwest and West Coast stations approach getting through the Eastern Wall and challenge the East Coast big guns?
You don't? the wins are beating them in a pile up for a mult. It's like, I beat out K3LR, all right, and then they blow your score away. But it's all about perspective. Like Dan said, you got to compete against your friends. It's like politics. All politics are local. All competition is local. And if you've got a contest club you're competing against, that's kind of a good way to go. You're probably not going to beat these big stations in Maine from anywhere out of Zone 5. So you have to temper your expectations and compete with who you can.
Both me and Chris have a lot of experience with this. We were both West Coast contesters, and we've put in some really big efforts, and we knew coming into these big efforts that we were not going to win. I already mentioned it before that we're going to be doing, I'm going to be doing ND7K coming up in AWLCW, and this is one of the biggest stations on the West Coast, and I'm going to most likely do 48 hours because that's what I do, and there is no, I'm not even thinking about winning. It's not going to happen. That's never going to happen, and that's okay. I know there's some people out there that like to figure out ways to maybe make it even with the East Coast or whatever, change the scoring. Like, it doesn't bother me. I'm competing against the guys on the West Coast, and if for some reason I actually beat somebody further east than me, that's awesome. Then I did really good. But if somebody in Zone 5 beats me, like, I don't care. They're supposed to beat me, So I think the perspective thing is the only way that you can really make it fun, because you're not going to win from the West Coast and the Midwest in a DX contest, but that's okay.
The next question has come up actually a lot in conversations, and particularly with the two of you. What are some SO2R single sideband tips that they can share? Does one only SO2R on sideband when one band is slow?
So SO2R on sideband is one of the hardest things that you can do. It's not easy on CW, but it's much easier than it is on sideband. So I think that we've talked a lot previously about like the 2B SIQ thing where you're actually running on two bands. That's generally not very productive on sideband. I think that traditional SO2R, where you're running on one band and tuning around on the other, is a lot more productive on phone. And I think that's the skill that you need to develop before you even think about doing anything else. Obviously, first step is get really good on the one radio. And once you feel like you've maxed out the one radio, then move on to SO2R by adding in, going to another band, tuning around and calling guys. Because, if you end up having a bunch of guys calling you on the run radio, you can flip your switch, turn the volume down, whatever you need to do to go back to the run radio, and you can ignore the other radio for a little bit. And then when it slows down again for a little bit, you run back to it. But I think first step is get really good on one radio, and then start working in the second radio, like a more traditional SO2R. And then if you're super crazy, then you can start thinking about 2B SIQ on phone. Some people can do it, but I think literally there's like 5 or 6 in the world that do it at this point. It's not something that you should really strive for. It's not going to help your score in most cases, but I think regular SO2R is a great goal.
I don't really have much to add. He makes a good point, though. Get really good at one radio first. I know extra gadgets and stuff is super cool, but if your goal is to get a higher score, focus on getting your higher score with what you have first. And then once you feel like you really max that out, then add a second radio. I would say SO2R on phone isn't inherently harder than CW. 2B SIQ, on the other hand, is like light years different. So that's a whole different subject.
Gawain's last question, do any of them try to be competitive in the RIDI contests?
Nope.
Do you operate RIDI contests?
Nope.
Dan?
No, same here. And I think I have some, I do respect the RIDI contesters. Some of me and Chris's good friends are really into RIDI, and we definitely support that. I think for us, we only have so many weekends a year that we can dedicate to contesting because of family and work. And we try to maximize the amount of fun that we have. And for us, it's phone and CW. Now, if you like RIDI, that's awesome. Go ahead and do that. But that's not something that I've maybe a few RIDI contacts over the years, but that's about it.
Yeah, I have a hard time. Like when I was growing up, we did RIDI contests, and in Alaska, you get a lot of aurora flutter, and the computer and the TNC back then couldn't decode the RTTY, but you could hear them just fine. And that always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I realize things are completely different now with, guys doing multiple decoders and stuff, but if I can't decode them in my head, it's not something I'm really interested in. Maybe down the road when I can't hear as well. But maybe one of these RIDI guys I'd love to talk. They have a whole other wealth of knowledge that I am not even close to coming into.
That concludes Gawain N0GJW's questions, but just jumping off from where he is heading here, he's obviously focused on young contesters, new contesters. As a relatively new contester myself, I've struggled to find the information I'm looking for, and certainly there's the National Contest Journal. I discovered the CQ Contest Reflector, but where would you advise somebody go so they can gain perspective on, for example, self-spotting or online contest scoreboards? Where can people, if not participate in the conversation, at least be listening to the conversation that's taking place?
Yeah, I think one of the things you mentioned was the CQ contest archives. You can always go there and see what the current topic of the day is, and you can take a look there. One thing that I would definitely recommend for a newer contester, especially the younger ones too, is don't be afraid to ask questions to some of the guys that are out there, like me and Chris. I do get asked questions occasionally, but it's pretty far between. And I would love it if people actually had some questions that I could potentially answer. And especially from a young guy, I would definitely do whatever I could to make sure that their question was answered. And I think that's one of the keys is don't be afraid to ask. The most of the guys that are big into contesting will get back to you. And if you find somebody that doesn't want to answer your questions, that's fine. Find somebody else. There are other guys out there that will. So
yeah, and Kevin, I think you hit a good point. There really is no single resource that guys can go to discuss these things and come up with these tips, and it's very scattered. I think it's kind of a legacy to the clubs. There'd be a club meeting with 50 or more people, and they would discuss all these things. That's not really a thing anymore, like it used to be, because everyone's virtual. So I think something like these interviews are a great way to get that discussion going, because I honestly don't think that single point exists. So I think this is great.
Well, it's good to know. I'll stop searching. And I've got to be honest with you, listening or reading the forums like CQ Contest can be somewhat confusing to me as a newcomer because the opinions are varied, as you know. They oftentimes get heated, and what I realize is happening is there's an ongoing conversation that's not going to get solved in the next week or month or maybe even year. It's been going on for a long time. So I walk away, for example, from the self-spotting conversation that's been raging on CQ Contest recently, really not knowing what the answer is.
I think that's an internet forum problem universally. So CQ Contest has its place for sure, but like you said, the opinions are so varied, you really can't nail down right or wrong.
Well, I guess what I've been doing too, and I won't mention any names, if I see a certain call sign weigh in, then because of my awareness of who that person is, then I usually attach a different level of credibility to that comment. Well, I will mention name. When Randy Thompson, K5ZD, weighs in, I'm thinking, okay, this is somebody who's at the top of his class as a contester, but I think he's also been at the table trying to resolve a lot of these things in his various contest capacities. So I give him a little bit more credibility, and that's what I look for.
Yeah, you got to put your narrow filter in on the reflectors for sure.
Any other feedback for a new contester before we wrap up?
One last thing. So I know a lot of newer contesters, newer operators are scared of CW, and I think that you really should give it a shot. CW is great, and even if you're just kind of starting out and you use a code reader, it's totally fine. If you need that help, it's allowed. There's no issues with it. The only time you can't use a code reader is if you're trying to actually win a contest. That's when it's not allowed. But if you're just getting on and making contacts and working the boys, just, get in there and do it. There's lots of great resources for learning CW, like the CW Academy. And I think that, you'll find that your signal travels much further than it does on sideband on CW, especially with smaller antennas. So don't be totally afraid of it. Give it a shot. I think that'd be great.
I feel like you're talking to me, Dan. I don't know if you know that or not, but I'm relatively proficient, but to get into a pileup, I took my key with me to the Bahamas, and I had it plugged in once, and it's like I can't give myself this kind of pressure. So I took it down, brought it home, never used it, but thanks for the nudge.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I appreciate you taking the time on a Monday night, the beginning of your work week, to join me. We'll see you again next Monday.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thanks.